Thanks, folks. We're back again as a panel. I'm joined by most of the presenters. So we have David Hedge from ExxonMobil, Brad Goodman from Dell, Josh Swanson from Red Hat, Gerardo, who is from Microsoft. And so, please pop your questions and I will do my best to read them out. I've got a few prepared ones as well. So, we'll have a bit of everything. So with that, maybe we could kick off, Dave, with you. You talked about the great things about FDO, and we're very grateful for that. But you were, really right at the front here in terms of this OPA deployment. I'm sure everything wasn't sweetness and light. What did you kind of learn about your FDO deployment? What went well? What were the challenges? What could you share with us?
Yeah, so I think the the what went well, I think was the industry, the technology and the supplier industry embracing trying something new. And so we got a lot of support from Intel, a lot of support from AS Rock, Canonical on the operating system side, to really flush out what we were trying to do, from a POC perspective, where originally we started to, all right, let's get this thing kind of polished and ready to go for a production deployment. Gaps that we still see, obviously FDO is amazing, it's an amazing technology from the security standpoint. It's that visibility during a device boot. And so you think about the IT industry, we've got, BMCs, we've got DRACs and ILOs, and name your favorite remote kind of console card. A lot of the devices that we're talking about here don't necessarily have that capability, especially as you start to go to lower end silicon. And so, really, I think some of the success of this is going to be based upon, especially when you're talking about edge, you're talking about geographically distributed, is going to be able to get that kind of remote telemetry back in the visual hands and eyes. Because if you think of in like our space, well pad may be 15 miles away. You got to roll an F-150 to go out there versus, turn on the screen for me and let me, get on the keyboard. That changes the game significantly. And so I think there's a tie between, what FDO is doing from a security and a standards perspective, but there's also a need for the silicon providers and the OEMs to step up their game to provide us that kind of end-to-end overall solution to make things like BMO work at the end of the day.
Great. Thanks very much. Question really for Josh. Brad talked about bare metal onboard and the ability to deliver software directly onto a piece of hardware. So going one step further, because when you did your presentation, you rightly enough said, "Hey, look, quite often we have a device, all the software is installed, and we kind of FedEx to the point of installation." And we've onboarded that. We've automated that last minute, so to speak, or what would have been 20 minutes of manual installation. When you look at bare metal onboard and what that could bring to the party, what's your view, when you're wearing literally your red hat here? How do you see that capability?
Well, I do have the fedora somewhere in this room, so I can pop it on for the next question if I need to. So I'm very much in favor of bare metal onboarding. I'm a big fan of providing multiple avenues to have secure onboarding. So while bare metal onboarding doesn't necessarily involve a Red Hat piece of technology per se, right? If it's implemented by a device manufacturer, by a chipset provider, whatever, that's okay because I still think there's a ton of value in securely onboarding and then having kind of a hook to deliver an operating system image or a platform onto the system once it's been onboarded, right? Um, Ideally, my end flow would be if we're going down the bare metal onboarding route, which again I fully support going that route. Once it's been attested to, cool. Now a Red Hat platform goes down, and what we've been working very heavily to build into our platforms is this is now a purpose-built platform, so you can embed your configurations, your applications, your container images, really whatever you want, and that just gets succinctly delivered to the devices. It's onboarded, content's there, it reboots, powers on, and it's working, right? So it doesn't. It's not a very different flow per se from the late binding, with an OS already there approach, but it's just kind of taking a different avenue. if you will. So our hope is that both avenues are valid and both would just work out of the box, right?
Thanks, Josh. Maybe a question here for Gerardo. Quite often I notice when I talk to people, there's a sort of temptation to say, look, we know our application. We don't think we need a standard. We could create one. Our engineers are very smart. When you look at Microsoft, I mean, same, of course, for the other companies on the call here, maybe Brad also wants to comment in a minute. The obvious question is, why did Microsoft find FDO attractive? You have bright engineers, you could have come up with 10 standards. Why adopt something like FDO? What interested you about it?
I think that one of the problems with any new technology innovation is that reaching critical mass is what is required to make it successful, right? So could we have created another technology that solves the problem in a way that we like it? Maybe, but is it going to reach the critical mass? What really is important in FDO is that we make the ecosystem happen. And to make the ecosystem happen, if we make the ecosystem happen, every company here is going to succeed. It's going to have a much better, right? So we need to make the ecosystem happen. And to make that happen, we need everyone to agree how we're going to solve this problem to make this scalable, to make this secure. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to create all these edge deployments as we want them to be in the future, right? So the best way to do that is standards. The best way to do that is to engage, to be interoperable, and to have a solution to make the industry better. Microsoft's goal here is to make the industry better so that we all win, so that we can all create this ecosystem. If the ecosystem is there, we're all going to be able to participate.
Thanks, Gerardo. Thank you. Brad, I mean, you talked obviously today very much with your wearing your hat as the co-chair of the working group. Maybe I could ask you a Dell question. If people come to Dell today and use something like Native Edge or Native Edge, what kind of products are available to them from a hardware perspective? Not necessarily the model numbers, but what classes of products can they onboard with FDO?
So we basically have a pretty rigid goal of FDO enabling. I would say, and again, I don't want to get into some things talking about supply chain, but if you look at our PowerEdge line, our high-end server line, FDO enabling that. There's some other stuff that I can't say, but if you watch some of our announcements at Dell Technology World, there's some things we are doing in the PowerEdge line to double down on our use of FDO in some pretty novel ways that are going to become a really key component to some of our major edge and enterprise releases coming out of DTW. Other than that, we also do it in our consumer line from our Optiplexes and Precision workstations, and even what we call our gateway line, which is kind of our smaller form factor, embedded, ruggedized industrial ones. So a big push. So these are all things that we are shipping now. This is all FDO enablement that we have for Native Edge across these. And we are, I'll just say, we're rapidly looking to FDO enable a lot of our other assets, including storage and networking products. And that's kind of part of a unification plan we have around management and the desire to zero-touch onboard things within that.
Thanks, Brad. A question that came in from one of the people on the call. They're saying, hey, we build hardware, and clearly we'd love to have one solution for everyone. That's very appealing. But one of the challenges, they're saying, hey, we don't know who's effectively going to onboard this device. We don't know who it's going to onboard to. So how do we program in a rendezvous server? So maybe I could throw that out to a couple of folk, and please, free to join. But maybe Brad, would you like to kick off?
So yeah, I can. So number one, the easiest answer would be build your own rendezvous server, stick your rendezvous server in that. And that's what we have done at Dell. We've built our own rendezvous server, global for all our products. I think there was some talk with some organization or organizations about doing kind of a general purpose open rendezvous server. And The reason it's a little funny is because there is some security around the rendezvous process. For example, if you just built an open rendezvous server, it would mean that anybody could shove any voucher in there and you could open out to spam and denial of service attacks. So there needs to be a little bit of security around rendezvous, and that's generally done around identifying who signed the vouchers. So if somebody builds a rendezvous server, it's only going to accept vouchers from signatories or manufacturers that they understand. So there are, I think at this point, 3 open source implementations of rendezvous server. So if your scale was small and you wanted to spin up your own one, that's something you could do. There was also a piece of work done in, I believe, the Go rendezvous implementation that would allow you to do it as like a microservice that ran serverless. And that's kind of a very cost-effective way to have something that can scale, yet not have a lot of upfront costs.
Right. And I think there historically, and again, we don't have anyone from Intel on the call today, but historically Intel has ran an open rendezvous server for folks who want to take advantage of that. I don't know, Gerardo, if you want to comment at all. If not, I'll move on.
Yeah, I think that's somewhere where if there's a problem, the industry is going to take the advantage and provide a solution for that and make sure that it's easy for people to deploy their own rendezvous servers. And so that's my only comment.
Thank you. One question that came in, David, was related to FDO and the Universal Automation IEC 61499. Is there any interaction between those, or are those different animals in different spaces?
So today, different animals, different spaces. So obviously FDO is doing, the onboarding, and in our case, loading of the operating system and then the deployment of workloads. One of those workloads happens to be an IEC 61499 environment that we're using for the process control runtime. Now, are there opportunities to extend some of the certificate stuff into that? Yeah, maybe, but it hasn't been a driving factor at this point.
Thank you. Maybe another question for you again, David. You showed onboarding of software when you did your video, and obviously when Brad was presenting, as did Gerardo's video, when Brad was presenting, he was talking about bare metal onboard and developing a kind of a standard approach to doing this using FDO. How do you see that capability? Is that something that appeals to you, having a more standardized way of doing BMO in addition to the FDO onboarding itself?
So yeah, I think it does. And one of the reasons why we're doing what we're doing today is there wasn't a solution. And so we were very early on in kind of this whole process, and we knew we wanted the core, but needed to extend it to make it easier for our folks to be able to adopt the technologies that we were trying to implement in this lighthouse. So I think yeah, it makes sense. I think the key proof point in all of this is going to be, do we see the platform providers adopt FDO as a way to put workloads on top of things? So it can't just be the hardware guys, it's got to be the platform people as well, because that'll naturally kind of drag the application developers, the system integrators, the platform, the other, the OT suppliers as well, as a way for them to ease implementation. And I think that's really what we're looking at as an end user. We want ease of implementation. And we want to do it securely, and we want somebody else to take care of it for us. And so we turn back to the tech community and go, okay, we know we need hardware, we need a platform, and then we need software to go on top of that platform. And that's kind of the reason why we went with the FDO implementation initially, was to begin to drive that kind of narrative.
Thank you. And I guess, Josh, you represent a platform player. Maybe you could talk. I mean, you kind of given some feedback on BMO, but maybe talk a little bit about the types of applications you see where you think FDO and potentially bare metal onboarding could be good fits.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a strong proponent of having this be something that just works for any onboarding of any platform that's going to be deployed outside of a very controlled environment. So outside of your cloud or your data center, right? We generally trust those environments. We don't generally trust our our implementations in things like retail stores or things in manufacturing plants or refineries or et cetera, right? I really think to bounce off of Dave's comments, right? I really think it's important that while we do have an implementation of FDO and functionally it's there, our goal over the next couple of months is to add in that really succinct user experience, if you will, make it super consumable. I also think there's an opportunity to kind of hook it in as part of an overall flow, right? So a grand vision might be being able to predetermine the intention and use of a device, and then having it be attested to and have FDO handle those parts, and then ultimately maybe even deliver the instructions. Okay, now that you are onboarded, now go deploy the software and turn yourself into a point of sale system or a human machine interface, whatever, right? What's cool though is we're seeing Red Hat products and technologies adopted in a bunch of these edge environments. I stated at the beginning I'm focused on industrial, but I play retail. I play a retail expert on TV, so I got that going for me. As part of that, we've seen adoption for everything from point of sale to industrial control, like software defined control, to like plant data center type stuff. So, running some of those heavier hitting applications at sites. We've worked with a bunch of different partners. We've worked with a bunch of different end organizations to really drive that adoption. Our goal really is, in my opinion, is to have multiple avenues for consumption. So you can buy it from your favorite vendor and we're embedded. That's cool. You can buy it directly from us and put your applications on top. That's cool. And FDO serves as kind of that, oh, you bought it? Cool. We don't care who you bought it from. It's just the succinct, secure way you get it onboarded and functional in your environment.
Thanks very much. Question here for you, Gerardo, that came in. Does it's basically saying, how does the Microsoft Restricted Operating System secure the FDO device credential? Can you comment at all on that?
That's a good question. We're trying to make sure that we leverage TPMs as much as possible, right? Our goal is to make sure that things are rooted in hardware root of trust, right? And then this helps us figure out where things are coming from and that these are not leaking all over the place. So that's the level of security we're looking, and we look forward to continue collaborating in the standard. So that's not where the buck stops, where we can do a lot of things and improve things.
Thank you. And there's a follow-up question. It says, does the Microsoft solution wipe the FDO device credentials when the OS is installed, or is it available still within the final OS?
It's you can choose. So the question is there an opportunity? And this is completely brainstorming and we're having discussions. What happens in replacement, right? If I want to redo something. So what do we do there? We're having very good conversations about that. So I can see arguments for both cases where we want to keep that there just in case we want to replace and repair something. We can use this for that. David is saying like, yes, please. And there's areas where we say, no, you need to delete it and we'll take care of that replacement in some other ways. But that's a great question. And I'm just giving you some light in where we're thinking.
Thank you. Question here, again, I'll throw it up to anyone. Brad, I think you maybe no one's comfortable, but it's a question about supply chains. And someone said IETF is developing the SCIT to help manage attestation and provenance for hardware and software. Could FDO fit into that story, in terms of providing related cryptographic roots of trust and secure supply chains? And again, I think a bit like the last question, this is a little bit of a what if rather than a where are we today?
So I'll say I don't know the specific either technology or standard that you were citing, but I would, other than that, say yes. So at Dell, we use secure component validation, SCV, and we have SCV certs that are minted in manufacturing. And right now, SCV and FDO kind of take a parallel path in our products. But if you look at what they do in terms of, they both need to be minted in the factory. They both need to be signed. They both need to have some proof of possession or keying available to them. And they both traverse the supply chain. And in the case of FDO, you're doing ownership transfers cryptographically. And in the case of SCV, if it's traversing a supply chain, you might have SCV deltas. So one of the things that we're trying to do, so if you look at the, for example, the ownership vouchers in FDO, there's this field called OBE Extra, which gets, you're allowed to put stuff in there when you sign over and you amend an ownership voucher. But one of the things that we've been looking at and experimenting with is putting the SCV stuff in there. So basically FDO and SCV travel along the same path. And at each of those hops, like going through the supply chain, going from a manufacturer to Dell or factory to Dell to reseller to customer, if there's ownership transfers and SCV deltas, they can kind of be, either done at the same time or by the same tooling or by the same people, the same processes, or maybe even the same keys. So that's something that we've been looking at Dell. And again, our SCV and FDO people groups efforts, they initiated from different places, but we're looking to see how we can collapse those even more, because it kind of naturally makes sense as things travel through that supply chain. And I think possibly, I don't want to say because we haven't formally talked about it, that's maybe something we can look at, possibly finding a way to standardize within the FDO spec, or more formalize. Like if I wanted to put that type of device verification into an ownership voucher, how might we do that in a more standardized way so it could be recognizable across different vendors and players and resellers, et cetera.
So this is something that could be discussed in the working group in the future area. One for you, David. I think you sort of touched on it a little bit with Kelly, but when you fast forward now, obviously, to bigger deployments, OPA deployments are now kind of at that turning point. Do you think automated secure onboarding is a nice to have in the world, or is it more than a nice to have?
So there's a reason why we're asking for it when we put out these RFPs and RFQs, and because we see the potential of how this changes, how we deploy, control systems. What's interesting is going from where we are today, which is very a centralized model. It's a plant. We got to operate it within the fence line. Things. If something goes wrong, you can walk out and deal with the device. When Kelly alluded to, PLCs are kind of up next. You begin to look at geographic distribution, and so how do you begin to manage it as a fleet? How do you begin to build these things out in an automated fashion? How do you get consistency? How do you get security? Areas where we haven't necessarily, done that type of deployment from a software standpoint. It becomes a really interesting question, and we see the benefit of being able to, if we have to remotely reload something, if we've got to swap something out, it gives us some additional flexibility in how we look at these systems. More similar to what like a laptop does in the IT world. We can begin to look at that from a controls perspective as well. So yeah, we definitely see the value. Again, there's some things we would love to see come along that would make this easier, but it's definitely something we're asking for as we go forward.
Thank you. We're kind of sort of coming up towards the end. So there's a question that came in, and I can certainly appreciate it, where someone's saying, look, there's a number of initiatives for onboarding. NIST have promoted one. And the obvious question is kind of, how do I, as a device maker, pick a winner? Why FTO? Why not Homebrew? Why not one of the other solutions that are out there? And I will give a couple of points here, but I would certainly welcome, the panel to jump in, because you've made decisions, you've invested in FDO. I would say, that there are several pieces to the puzzle. I think not all the solutions are born equal. Firstly, in terms of completeness, I personally think one of the big attractions to the FDO solution is it is a complete solution. It really provides all the pieces of the puzzle for onboarding. Some of them provide the attestation. They kind of get you that confidence that the other device is who it says it is, but it doesn't, it leaves kind of the rest of it up to you. And that means, of course, that you're kind of writing around that. That means that each implementation, may or may not be the same. They may or may not have any kind of certification program. So that's kind of going to be on you as well. Some of those, I would say, are also not necessarily evolving. And as you've heard from Brad, you've got the evolution here as we bring on BMO and version 1.2. And I think also just, again, the people that you're seeing here on the screen today show that some of the heavyweights in the industry are choosing FDO, and they're doing it for a reason. But with that, maybe I could throw that. Anybody who'd like to, give their own 2 cents on it, maybe we could start with Brad.
I just say, for all the reasons that you mentioned, Richard. Also, so the work, for example, that's going on in FDO 1.2 is allowing us to extend out to more of those enterprise and more widely federated types of things. And that means basically you have multiple control planes. Your control planes might be a combination of in cloud, in on-prem, or multi-regional. And the ability to better manage keys in the context of a more widely distributed federation. So I would say that, and then also obviously, the work that we have going forward specifically around bare metal onboarding of commercial off-the-shelf general purpose computing devices. If you look at a lot of the other specs, they came out of the like the network switch kind of spaces, and some of the things that they have, like they have the abilities to do things like late bind and dynamically do firmware updates. But if you look at what that is, it's very targeted around firmware updates. And the firmware updates are much simpler than saying, oh, I want that Red Hat ISO over there. I want to install that, but here's my configuration, and I want to pull all this together. Oh, wait, I changed my mind. I want to do Windows instead of Red Hat. So just being able to say, here's my firmware file, make sure that's installed and up to date, is a much, much simpler problem than the latter, which is going to, it's still evolving. It's going to require a lot of work. It's going to require a lot of partnership. But that's something that's real important to us. And I think the other general purpose compute platform vendors and even the operating system distributors as well.
Thanks. And maybe Hardy, again, I'd like to ask you the same question. Maybe you could also, you're an active member of the working group as well. Maybe in addition to kind of giving your why you think FDO is a good solution, maybe just comment also about some of the enhancements that you personally feel that Microsoft you will bring moving forward as ideas to the working group, just to give people a taste of what's going through your mind.
Yeah, I think that I agree with Brad that we tend to take a more broad view of things, and therefore the applicability of FDO is a little bit wider. I also feel very strongly that any homebrew solution is could be great, but not scalable. It's not gonna hit the critical mass. What we need is to all partner on something that we all agree on. All right. So from that perspective, FIDO Device Onboard has a great advantage. I think Microsoft is super interested in increasing the security of our customers, and we see FDO as one way to make that happen in a very substantial way. And we see it already. So that would be my point.
Thank you. Josh, maybe a comment from you. You've been actively invested in this, and you've talked to a lot of customers, and I'm sure you get people saying, well, what about this standard? What about that standard?
Yeah, I want to echo, I agree with all the points that have been discussed. I think there's 2 that I use the most routinely, which is the community element of it, right? This is a shared open medium. We're all contributing to it. And then the extensibility, which is actually, in my opinion, a product of the community focus, right? Bare metal onboarding is a perfect example here. This is a feature functionality that wasn't something that was originally on the roadmap or to be discussed, but we as a community came together and said, we should do this, right? And because we're driving this with a very communal focus, we can then say we're going to extend this, and we can talk about the best ways to do that, and we can do it in a very open and collaborative way. And I really think that's what's making this so successful, right? Is it's lots of eyes, lots of opinions, lots of input, lots of expertise coming together to build something we all know we need and we all want.
Can I make one other comment on that, Richard?
Please.
So on that, so I think, FDO is a protocol, like it's a wire-based protocol, and that, there'll be some movement on there, but it's relatively stable and well used. But then aside that, there's this concept of an ownership voucher and how the ownership voucher is created and how it's attested and how it's extended in information that you can put in there. And what we've recently been discussing, to Josh's point, is the concept of, okay, we have this ownership voucher, which is a great way to attest and transfer all this information. What can we do with that? And we look at, I think it was Jeff Cooper, who is one of the founders and former chair, described it as like a suite of things we can do. It's not necessarily that we're going to be rapidly evolving the protocol, but if we have this concept of a voucher that has these characteristics and allows us to do this thing and to embed this information, what are the things that we can use this as a tool for? Bare metal onboarding is one example. There's nothing I call a tested payload, which is basically to be able to throw a piece of information at you and to have it self-proven that it is in fact signed by the person who is in fact your owner, and therefore you should obey and pay attention to it. But extending the suite concept is something that we're looking at doing, as using the general primitives of FDO as more general purpose tools to do some of these other things.
Thank you. David, do you want to add anything as an end user?
Yeah, sure. So from our standpoint, part of it is the names associated with FIDO. So as an end user, we don't try to develop standards typically, but having the companies that really define some of this technology, bring it together and are able to move the market, is definitely a great sign of something that we want to be a part of, and adopt if we're trying to make a change in how we look at security on some of these devices. I think the other part of this is, for us to go from not even knowing what it is to being able to have stuff working in a lab, it didn't take a PhD. We're able to interpret what's going on, how it kind of flows, and really understand, what the possibilities are, and see that extensibility concept of, what the future could bring if we decide to invest in kind of where it's going. And the last thing, it added value to what we were doing right away. It took a very complex topic, loading devices was something we've never done before, using containers for process control, and demystified it to the point where we were concerned about clicking a button. And we could control that in human readable code. And we could make sure, as Brad pointed out, that we knew exactly what was going on that device. That device was supposed to be in our network and we could trust it. And so, that's from an end user perspective, that's why we've gone down this road.
Thanks very much. And I probably would just add one thing. The question did relate to NIST. I mean, obviously, the FIDO Alliance does have a close relationship with NIST with respect to things like passkeys, and we certainly would love to extend and broaden that to the world of FDO. Just firstly, I'd like to maybe bring things to an end here. Very much a thank you to all of those that the panelists today for being here, contributing and sharing their thoughts and experience. It's the most exciting thing I find being involved with this program is just the variety of people, the depth of knowledge of people that you work with in this space is quite incredible. FIDO has an amazing membership. And I just want to thank them all for their time and contribution. And my parting words would be, if you've heard something today that you'd like to know more about, you can absolutely reach out to me. You can also look at some of the other materials that we have on the FIDO website. And I would say if you hear something and you're like, yeah, I like this, but the key point is that FDO, as you heard from Brad, is evolving. It's not set in stone forever and ever. It is evolving. We're bringing new capabilities in terms of how it should be used in the real world. And Brad's doing that. He's looking at, how could it be better in an enterprise environment, as an example. And I would very much encourage anyone who says, I want to get involved, to get involved. Come join the Alliance, come get involved with the working groups, bring your expertise, bring your knowledge. You would be extremely welcome. So with that, thank you very much all to our presenters. Thank you all for attending and sparing your time today. I hope you found it useful and productive.